We're going to talk this evening about legislative process and how understanding that process can help us pass better legislation. And if many of you have been involved in the roundhouse, the legislature, thank you, and understand how opaque some of this process is. And after years of experience, I I have still lots to learn, so I'm looking forward very much to this evening's program. Thank you. Thank you, Representative. It's all yours.
Okay. Thank you, Jim. Appreciate that. Appreciate everyone tuning in tonight. I am Matthew McQueen. I am the current state representative for House District 50. Um, my district includes basically at this point, well, it went through a pretty substantial redistricting in the last redistricting. I went from 4 counties down to 2. I have the southern half of Santa Fe County and a little bit of Sandoval County, which is the Placitas area. I'm in my 11th year in the legislature, so I've been doing this for a while. There's, I think, 5 members of my class left, and there's only, I think, 5 members of the 70 House members that are more senior to my class. For the past 9 years, I've been chair of the House Energy, Environment, and Natural Resources Committee. And I've been on that committee since day one in the legislature. That's always been my interest and my passion. And it's a pleasure and honor to be able to chair that committee. My background is mostly, I've been a lawyer. I've been a practicing attorney for over 30 years. My practice focuses on land, on real property. I do all sorts of land transactions. My specialty is conservation easements. Um, I do those throughout the state, and I've done some in other states as well. I live in Galisteo, New Mexico, which is a little bit off the beaten track. And I live out here with my wife, and I've got 2 relatively young kids. They just finished 3rd grade and 5th grade. So my son's moving into middle school. He's very excited about that. So what I thought I'd do tonight is just sort of run through the 2025 session, talk about how the different roles of different groups in the legislature, and then talk about the interim, and then talk about the upcoming 2026 session, which is a short session. My hope is I'll do that fairly quickly, and I'll leave a lot of time for questions. Happy to answer any questions you might have. So first off, wins and losses, focusing on natural resources. The bill that I've spent the last probably 8 years working on is Game Commission reform. Our Department of Game and Fish um, has struggled at times with its commission. The commission has been political appointees. They come and go. They have different interests. They get fired occasionally. When you get a new governor, you get a new commission. So what we had a bill that had 3 main parts. Mission reform at the department, so clarifying that they can work on any wildlife species, changing the name of the department from Department of Fish and Game to Department of Wildlife. Reform, and then second part, reforming the Game Commission itself, putting in some job qualifications, and instituting a nominating committee. So there'll be a screening process before the governor selects them, and then getting the departments more money, including money that does not stem from hunting and fishing licenses, which is sort of a basic fairness issue. Unfortunately, the governor vetoed part of the bill. She vetoed the part that provided some removal protection for the commissioners. And she wasn't happy with the length of time it would take to remove a bad commissioner. Unfortunately, by making that change, she will make it so any governor can remove a good commissioner as well. So that's still a work in progress, and we hope to fix that at some point. Another big bill that wasn't my bill was Senate Bill 21, which is the pollution discharge bill. This is the NIPD's bill, National Pollution discharge elimination system, basically a state version of that. This is in response to the Supreme Court's Sackett decision, which basically left a lot of waters in New Mexico, a lot of streams, arroyos, watersheds, watercourses unprotected. And so this is the state stepping up to take primacy in that and protect our natural resources. Another bill I worked on was the Senate Bill 23, the royalty rate bill. This increased the royalty rate on our state trust lands in the Permian Basin to what essentially is closer to a market rate. We were basically leasing minerals we own, so not a tax, not a fee. This is something we own, our state trust lands, to major oil companies at below market rates. So after a couple of tries, we finally fixed that. The Strategic River Reserve changes passed, and we unfortunately had both the Strategic River Reserve and the Strategic Water Supply. So Strategic Water Reserve and Strategic Water Supply, which is very confusing, and they're very different. The reserve is basically about in-stream flow. The water supply bill originally included pieces of reuse for produced water from oil and gas industry, and also brackish water. That got pared back substantially and basically became the strategic brackish water supply bill. We took out all the references to reusing produced water because we didn't think that was quite ready. We also passed some pretty significant new funding, the Local Solar Access Fund and the Community Benefit Fund. These are bills from Senator Mimi Stewart to provide funding for climate projects in and around New Mexico. So we had some pretty good success on the natural resource front. There were plenty of other, for example, oil and gas reform bills that did not advance, and in a minute I'll talk about why. The other major topic I wanted to talk about besides natural resources is legislative reform. And the first piece of legislative reform that has sort of kicked in is staff. So for my first time in 11 years, I actually have a legislative staff person. I saw her on here earlier. I feel very fortunate that I was able to hire Sarah Bozet, who lives in my district, who is my local school board member, and who is a registered nurse. So she brings a lot of expertise, including expertise I don't necessarily have in healthcare and education. And that's been great. And we're still sort of figuring out, how that works and how to best use her talents and her time. But that was one piece of reform that did get passed last year. And then the other reforms, haven't been as successful. I think critically, one of the most important reforms is paying the legislators. It's, in my opinion, it's fundamentally undemocratic, little d democratic, to not pay the legislators because we end up with legislators in the legislature who can afford to serve. You have people on pensions, you have retired people, you have people that own businesses. You don't have a lot of young people because it's hard to take that much time off on a job you don't get paid for. So that's something we desperately need to fix. I'll talk about why that died. I had a bill, HCR 1, which would have changed our current 60-30 legislative sessions to two 45-day sessions. Really importantly, in that joint resolution, which is a constitutional amendment, it would have removed the germaneness requirement from the 30-day session. So we're coming up on a 30-day session in 2026. And in order to work on an issue that affects New Mexico, you either have to get a message from the governor or you have to attach an appropriation or, you try to find some way to get the bill heard. And that's something that, in my opinion, it is just legislative malpractice that we have not addressed that issue because it limits what we can do as a legislature. That bill passed the House, I think, with 4 no votes. People think it's time. And then it went over to the Senate and it never got a hearing. So basically, a single senator, the chair of that committee, refused to give it a hearing. and that bill is dead, even though she had supported the bill in the past, which, so I really don't understand what's going on there. And it's super frustrating that our reforms keep dying in this way. Um, there was a lot of discussion about doing 45-day sessions in that we struggle to get our work done in a 60-day session. So how are we going to do all that work with two weeks fewer? Another rule I introduced, which was, I wanted to get out there for discussion, was a bill limit. So each legislator would be limited to 5 bills. 5 bills as the lead sponsor. You could still co-sponsor other bills. So you could have your name on plenty of bills. But if each legislator was limited to 5 bills, we would have better bills. We would have better prepared legislators. We would have a better chance to get those bills that you think are a priority through the system. I think we had 1,200 or 1,300 bills in the last session. 5 bills per legislator. That's we have 112 legislators, so 560 bills. That's a much more manageable workload, and that's something I hope we consider in the future. Another piece of legislative reform, which actually passed the legislature and now goes to the voters, is the elimination of the pocket veto. So the elimination of the pocket veto would require the governor, it wouldn't prevent a governor from vetoing a bill. That right would remain. It would just require a governor and not this governor because it won't take effect during her term. It would require a governor to tell us why. Why have you vetoed this bill? And that's a really important transparency issue. I've had a number of bills pocket vetoed. I had one pocket vetoed this session that dealt with free roaming horses. And it's really frustrating to work that hard on a bill, get it through the session, get it through both chambers, get it up to the governor, and it just disappears. Like you don't even get an explanation for why your bill's been vetoed. So those are just some of the things we worked on in the past session, some successes, some failures. I did say I'd explain the salary issue. That bill has passed the House a number of times and it dies in the Senate. This year it started in the Senate and it died in its second Senate committee. We had Democrats voting against it. The Democrats who voted against it, one is, I think, the senior most member of the legislature, so has been there the longest. And another is, frankly, one of the wealthiest members of the legislature and probably doesn't need to get paid. And so we face this struggle. Change is hard, even when we're trying to change the legislature that we serve in for the better. So in the session, there are different groups, there are different individuals that have different roles. So first off, role of parties. So I'm not talking about like the statewide Democratic Party or Republican Party. They play a role, but it's more muted during the session. I mean like membership in the party in the House, in the Senate. Your party is your caucus. They're your team. They're often your friends, your colleagues, and you count on them. That being said, you don't take them for granted because their vote is their vote, and they have the right to vote for your bill or against your bill. And on the Democrats side, that happens. Our members vote for bills and vote against bills. There's one member of on the Republican side who likes to say that the Democrats are told what to do. And it's just kind of comical because it's demonstrably false. The Republicans vote much more in lockstep than the Democrats ever have. And when I talk to my Republican colleagues, the ones I'm able to talk to, I hear stories about, like they voted out of lockstep and they got criticized and they got harassed and there was blowback from their own party. And that's how they make sure it doesn't happen again in the future. I can remember talking to a Republican colleague because I thought I might be able to convince him to vote for one of my bills. And, he said to me basically, he can only buck his party so often. Like he can't just vote for a bill, a bill that he thinks is a good idea, because that might limit his ability to vote for some other bill. So the role of parties is important, and it affects whether or not legislation passes. Next up, the role of committees. The typical path for a bill is gets introduced in one chamber. It gets assigned to typically two committees. If it goes through those two committees, it goes to the floor. If it gets off the floor, it goes to the other chamber. Again, typically two committees. Then the floor of the other chamber. If it gets through all those hurdles, it can go to the governor. So the reality is there are a lot of ways to kill a bill, and it's much harder to pass a bill because you have to get over every single hurdle to pass. And you can kill a bill in any of a variety of committees. The committees don't necessarily reflect the overall makeup of the chamber. There are committees that are known to be more conservative. Even if in the House, all the committees have a Democratic majority because we have a Democratic majority. But you still have Democratic members who are a little more conservative on the spectrum. So there are some committees that can be really hard to get through. Assigning a bill to multiple committees is a way to effectively kill it. Representative Sariñana had a bill regarding setbacks, and it got three committees in the House, and that's unusual. It got through its first two committees, which was somewhat remarkable. And this is setbacks of schools from oil and gas installations. Then it never got heard in its third committee, so it died. And that's it seems unfair in a way that it got three committees, it got over the first two hurdles, and then never even got a chance in the third. Both chambers load up certain committees. So Judiciary, House Judiciary, Senate Judiciary, tons of bills go to those committees. And it's pretty clear to me that the reason we send so many bills to those committees and so many of those bills never get heard is because it's a way to quietly kill them. It allows leadership to sort of pick and choose what bills they want to see advance. Because either the chairs of those committees can decide, or in consultation with leadership, they can decide to simply not hear a bill because, hey, we have too many, we can't possibly hear them all. And so some bills advance and some bills don't. And that's the way committees work. Leadership. Leadership is critically important. Senate Majority Leader Peter Wirth assigns bills to committee. House Speaker Javier Martinez assigns bills to committee. That's a lot of power. How many committees they get, which committees they get. I think over in the Senate, the sort of fiefdoms that are built around committees are a little stronger than over in the House. I sometimes ask for bills to be assigned to my committee. For example, I conferred with the chair of the House Agriculture and Water Resources Committee about the strategic water supply bill. We were both concerned about that bill. We both wanted that bill to come to our committee, and we talked to the speaker, and he agreed, and he sent that bill to both of our committees, and that was a good thing. So sometimes that happens, other times it doesn't, and sometimes avoiding a committee is a way to keep a bill alive, because in a particular committee it won't get the votes, and that just based on the individuals who are in the committee. I mean, figuring out how people are going to vote is, it's a little bit of an art form, it's a little bit of a science, and it's based on experience. And that's really important when you're trying to map out how you're going to get your bill through committee. My Senate Bill 5, the Department of Game and Fish, Game and Fish Commission Reform Bill, got 3 referrals in the Senate. And one of my co-sponsors was Peter Wirth. And Peter Wirth gave it 3 referrals. And he did that because he thought it was important, because it touched on 3 distinct committees in the Senate, and he didn't want to be perceived as trying to fast track it. And so it got 3 committees, and it got through 3 committees. Part of the reason it got through three committees in the Senate, I think, is probably because he was a co-sponsor and people knew he supported it. So that's another way leadership can sort of push a bill forward. The role of advocates. So it's, in my 11th year in the legislature, it's occurred to me that nothing I have ever accomplished in the legislature have I done it alone. When I was in my first couple of years, I thought, oh, like this is a good idea. I'll introduce this bill and people will vote for it because it's a good idea. And that's just not the way it works. So I work really hard with advocates who work, reaching out to other members, reaching out to the public, crafting a bill. Um, Advocates are really important. And like all the big bills I've ever had passed, passed because I was working with people who believed in those bills. I draw a distinction between advocates and lobbyists. Advocates lobby on a bill because they believe in the subject, because that's their passion. Lobbyists lobby on a bill because someone pays them to. And that's, some lobbyists will take, whoever sort of walks in the door. Advocates more often work for a nonprofit or an interest group like that. And that's how I sort of divide that group into two smaller groups. The role of citizens. So the role of citizens is really important. It's a little different. I live in Santa Fe County. The Santa Fe legislators, I think, are all blue. I think in Albuquerque, they're almost all blue. I think there's one or two Republicans. I remember citizen input is really important, right? And we now do these hybrid committee meetings where you can be in the room and you can get called on, or I can recognize you on Zoom. So that's good. So that sort of opens it up to people in different areas of the state. But in terms of like lobbying, I can remember I got an email once, I think it was from the Sierra Club. I like the Sierra Club, so I'll pick on them a little. And it was about some bill, and it said, contact Peter Worth and tell him to support this bill. And my reaction was, don't bother Peter. He supports this bill. We all know he supports this bill. You don't need to flood him with emails to convince him to support a bill we already know he supports. If where citizens have the biggest impact are on legislators who are waffling, who might vote against their party, and in particular, it's on legislators that represent that citizen. So I can remember when, in Trump's first term, when they were confirming Supreme Court justices, and Susan Collins of Maine was always very concerned about whoever the nominee was. And so all the interest groups are saying, call Susan Collins and tell her to vote against this justice. And my belief is if you didn't live in Maine, then she didn't care what you thought about that justice. I think it's a little different in New Mexico. I'd like to hear from New Mexicans, but I'm going to pay much more attention to someone who's in my district. And I think that's true for other legislators. So one of the ways citizens and advocacy groups can really make a difference is to make sure they have contacts throughout the state. Make sure that they know people in other, purple districts or even red districts that can reach out to their legislator and tell them what they think about the bill. That's really the best way for citizens to make a difference during the session. Next step, interim. I actually had a meeting today. I am vice chair this year of the Water and Natural Resources Interim Committee. I share that duty with Senator Liz Stefanik. She happens to be my senator, so she and I are close. She's chair this year, and House and Senate takes turns chairing the different committees. So we had a planning meeting today. We were talking about where to meet and what we were going to talk about and just sort of mapping that out. And we have our organizational meeting with the whole committee next week. Interim committees are important. It's a chance to, if you can attend in person, that's good. We're getting better at webcasting the committees. There is a Zoom option. sometimes there are committees in areas that don't have good connectivity, so that doesn't always happen. And if you actually want to talk to a legislator, there's really nothing that beats being there in person. But we will, first we'll develop a work plan, which is kind of like a menu of all the different things we might want to talk about. And then from there, we'll develop agendas for different meetings. The meetings are held in different parts of the state. We try to, if we're going down to Alamogordo, there's a desalination plant in Alamogordo. So maybe we stop and see that. We hear about water issues. I mean, we try to, focus topics that apply to particular areas of state when we're in that area of the state. So it's a way to sort of get out and get informed and hear from people. And it's basically just sort of a series of study sessions during the interim leading up to the next session. So next session, 2026, is a short session. And it's frustrating for a number of reasons. First, as I said, it's really a question of what I can work on. I had a free roaming horse bill that passed both the House and the Senate. So I was very excited about that. Passed the House, I think, with 4 no votes, passed the Senate unanimously, went up to the governor. She didn't sign it. She pocket vetoed it. I can't work on that in the 30-day session um, because it's not germane. Um, and that's frustrating. Actually might be able to, now that I'm thinking about it, I might be able to bring it back because it was vetoed. I'll look into that. New Mexico has some really significant problems, some really significant issues. And I believe as legislators, we should work on those issues until we make them better, until we solve them. And only being able to work on an issue every other year is just nuts. That's something we need to fix, and we haven't fixed it yet. As I said, the governor sets the agenda. I'd love to change that. The governor likes to set the agenda. I've worked under 2 governors. Both these governors have been very stingy when it comes to messages. I'm in my 11th year. I've received a grand total of 0 messages from a governor to hear a bill in a short session. The other problem with the 60-30 cycle is this interim is not a campaign year. The last interim was. So the way it works out, the campaign year occurs right before the 60-day cycle. So in the interim before a 60-day cycle, when I should be working on bills, I also have to campaign for reelection because I have a 2-year cycle being in the House. And that, I only have so much time. So that makes it difficult. Now I have more time on my hands because I'm not campaigning for reelection. I'm working on other things. But I'm coming up on a 30-day session, so there's less I can do. And so just the way that plays out is frustrating. If it was 30-60 instead of 60-30, even that would be better, but that's not what we have. Another factor we're going to have to think about coming up into the 30-day session is that we have a lame duck governor. That will be her last regular session of her last term as governor. We don't know what she's going to do next. I wish her well. I think she would like to get a job in DC. I'm not sure what that would be, at least with the current environment in DC. But she has one more session. So does that mean she loosens it up a little? She gives us more to work on. Some of the bills I've worked on will not impact this governor because of the timing. The pocket veto bill won't impact this governor. It'll be on the ballot in November of 2026. If it passes, it'll take effect January 1st, 2027. That's for our next governor. Same with the Department of Game and Fish Reform bill. We actually had a delayed enactment of that bill, partly so the agency can get ready for it, partly so that they can prepare for the name change and the mission change and look at hiring new staff. So we're sort of phasing that in. It'll be interesting, in the last regular session, of our current governor, whether things are different. So that's, I think, a pretty quick rundown of sort of how I approach the sessions and how I view the sessions and how the sessions work. And Jim and Tom, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for that. I have to call it a thumbnail of a very complicated institution, but illuminating. So as I mentioned actually I failed to mention at the beginning, if you have a question for Representative McQueen, if you put it in the chat, and then Tom, my compatriot, will look at those and we'll select some. But
I
I'm going
I
to
have
take
one, Jim. Yeah.
okay. I'm gonna take my privilege as a moderator and ask you, Representative. You talked a little bit about a couple of structural changes that you had proposed uh, to the legislative process. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more broadly about the balance of power in New Mexico between the governor and the legislature, and how that, if you are have an experience with how that might compare to other states.
That's an interesting question. The balance of power, the legislature, we have three branches of government. The legislature, in my opinion, is by far the weakest, just insanely so. I think our share of the state budget is something like 0.2%. So not 2% of the budget, 0.2% of the budget is our share of the state budget. The governor controls, of course, all the executive branch agencies, the vast majority of the budget. The judiciary has some, and the judiciary has its own role in interpreting laws. But it's really one-sided between the legislature and the governor. And so when I pitched both HJR 1, which was the 45-day session bill that removed germaneness, and HJR 2, which was the pocket veto bill, my pitch was we're the legislature, and both of these joint resolutions are good for the legislature. We need to stand up for ourselves and we need to empower ourselves so we can do more good work for New Mexico. And one of those got through and the other did. But like I said, removing the germaneness requirement it's just a no-brainer to me in terms of legislative authority. And because it's a constitutional amendment, it doesn't have to go to the governor. If we pass that through the legislature, it goes straight to the voters. She or whoever the governor is can't veto that. And yet we haven't done it, which doesn't make any sense to me. The governor has, of course, the veto right, whether it's a pocket veto or whether she gives us a veto message. We've, in my 11 years, I don't think we've ever overridden a veto. And I'll give you two examples of that. One, when we had Governor Martinez, Governor Martinez vetoed a bunch of bills out of spite. She was mad at the Senate Republicans, and so she just started vetoing every bill that came up. And there was one bill in particular, it was called the Teachers Are People Too bill. I think it dealt with sick leave for public school teachers. It passed, I believe, unanimously, and she vetoed it. And so there was a discussion about overriding. And we took an override vote in the House, and it failed. All the Republicans voted against overriding the veto, including the Republican sponsor of that bill. He would not vote to override the veto of his own bill because he did not want to cross the governor. That's how hard it is to override the veto. A second veto override story would be the 180 days in the school year bill. The governor wanted to extend the school year. I might have the number of days off. Tried to do that by rule. The superintendents challenged that and won in court. We tried to legislate that so it was clear that she could not do that by rule. It passed the House and the Senate, and the governor vetoed it. We overrode the vetoed it in the House. It was the last day of the session. We did a veto override motion. There was it was unanimous, and then the Senate never took it up because we were running out of time. Um, so 11 years in the legislature, I've never seen us override a veto. We have that power, and we're not using it, which just means we're ceding that power to the governor.
Thank you. Thank you. Uh, Tom, do we have
Yeah,
another one?
I have a couple of questions that have come up in the chat. The first one I think can be um, discussed quickly, Representative. It was during your discussion of paying the legislature, and it was a comment, but I think also a question about stipends for legislators. And do legislators get a stipend? What role does that play? How does that compare to a salary?
We don't get a stipend. Currently, we get it per diem. So per diem is an IRS calculated rate. It's right now, I think it's like $180 a day. It's the calculation is it's supposed to cover your hotel and your meals for a day in Santa Fe. I mean, it's regional in that way. That only applies when we're in session or when we're in committee. Um, so that's what we get. We are apparently the last truly unpaid legislature, but like apparently Montana gets like $25 a day. So they get it's not per diem, it's a salary, but it's actually less than our per diem. I think New Hampshire, which has a crazy number of legislators, like 500 in their legislature, I think they get a small salary too. So I mean, well, I think the salary should be, I don't think it should be full time. It shouldn't be six figures. I think should probably be comparable to what, like maybe a county commissioner makes. And what the proposal has been is to create a salary commission and let them set the salary. So we haven't tried to decide whether our salaries would be. We have tried to set up a commission who can do that and then update it periodically. I think I
Thank you.
answered your question.
Good answer. Thank you, Representative. Here's another one. There were a lot of comments in the chat, but they're not really questions. So I think this one is a question. If you're a citizen or perhaps a member of an advocacy group and have an idea about some legislation that you'd like to see introduced in the legislature, how do you go about doing that?
First and foremost, start early. So, like every year, you know, you get through the holidays, it's January, the papers start talking about the legislative session coming up, and I get calls saying, "Oh, will you run this bill?" And it's like, well, I haven't seen it, hasn't been drafted. I haven't worked on it. I haven't built a constituency. I haven't built support. It hasn't been vetted in an interim committee hearing. So the topics we're looking at on the interim now are the things we should take up in the next session. So if you have a bill or if you have an idea, you don't even have to have a bill. Like we have drafters, and we can take your idea and ask them to draft something. Um, you know, find a legislator, whether it's your local legislator or a legislator who has, that interest or that expertise. Like if you had an education bill, I'm probably not your guy. If you have a natural resources bill, maybe I am. You find someone who would be interested in that topic, you approach them, you start fleshing it out. And there is this whole process. And the bills that have the best chance of success are the ones that go through that process.
Thank you very much for that. Um, Here's one. I'm just going to read it. What is your sense of the legislative members to pass a modernization bill? And you've talked a bit about that already. Is it a matter of leaders not disposed to give it a doable path through both chambers, or do you think not enough members support it?
Um, The salary bill in particular, we've had a hard time in the Senate. Um, uh, and we've had more success in the House. The salary bill is a good example of like if you had that bill on the Senate floor, it might pass, but it didn't get past Senate Finance because two Democrats voted against it. And the Senate committees are a little tighter because there's fewer number of senators. In my committee in House Energy, I have a 7-4 committee. And by having a 7-4 committee, that means I can lose one Democrat and still pass a bill 6-5. If you have, a 5-6 committee or, a 5-7 committee, you can't lose that vote and still pass a bill. So the salary bill lost 2 votes in Senate Finance and it was dead. That's part of the committee issue. That was 2 senators, Democratic senators, all the Republicans voted against it, who effectively killed that bill. So that personnel, that makeup is really important in terms of where a bill goes. Even if it might pass a floor vote, it's still got to get past those committees.
Okay, thank you. Here's a quick one. Is it a bad idea to send a brief email to all committee members to ask them to support a bill?
Um, it's sort of mixed. If I get emails that are addressed to every member of the legislature, and like I can pretty quickly delete those. Those are forms. I get, if there's a gun bill or an alcohol bill or a tobacco bill, you know, hundreds of emails, and I'll open a couple, and if I'm getting an email from some guy in Virginia who opposes gun safety, then I can figure out what that email is. I can select 150 emails. I can delete them all at once because I don't care what some guy in Virginia thinks about gun safety. Um, the 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 emails that get the most attention are personal emails, emails from someone you might know, emails that aren't a form email. I mean, so there's this whole sort of range of how impactful an email might be, and you can imagine it's pretty logical the ones that are more impactful versus the ones that are less impactful. The more it looks like just a form email that someone clicked on, the less impactful it will be. Sometimes I get emails that are clearly like sample emails and they have like parentheses and it says, tailor your message here. And it's still, instead of people having tailored it, it still just says, tailor your message here. I mean, you got to put a little effort into it.
Yes. Another quick one. What is your opinion of the optimum length of each session?
Um, I would do 90-90 if I could, because I think New Mexico has serious problems that need to be addressed. And it's hard to do that in a 60-day session or a 45-day session or a 30-day session. To do 90-90, it's probably a full-time salary, not a part-time salary for the legislators. And we're not going to get there. Like we can't even get the Democrats to vote for that right now. And that's why I want to do 45-45 because first of all, it evened out the sessions, which I think is an important first step. Secondly, it got rid of the germaneness. And then like in 5 years and 10 years, if we want to add 15 days to each session, we can. But to me, like that was a good first step, 45-45, and we can build from there. A lot of what happens in the legislature is incremental, and you don't always want to hold out for everything you want because there's a good chance you're not going to get it. So improving the current system and maybe eventually working up to something like that seems like a good strategy to me.
All right. Somebody asked a question about climate change. Is there concern of legislative action on 350 parts per million, which is now closer to 450 parts per million of CO2? It's actually right around 430 today. So prospects for action on reducing greenhouse gas emissions.
We have made progress. And one of the problems is we are a state working on a global issue. So there's a limit on what we can do. We passed a couple good funding bills. We're working on the energy transition. I've always believed that our transition away from fossil fuels will be just that. Will be a transition. I really think that oil and gas, another 5 or 10 years, we'll look at oil and gas the way we look at coal, that it's dirty and expensive, and we don't need it. As our renewables get better, I think the solution, I think the transition is going to be driven by economics, not by politics. That being said, I've always done whatever I can in the legislature to foster renewable energy, and that's, I think, part of that transition. So we're making progress, almost certainly not enough progress and not fast enough.
I'd like to ask a follow-up question, if I might, about this. This is the perennial, a big question for the environmental community about how to affect good legislation. And it often comes down to how to get around the power of the oil and gas lobby. So I agree with you about, Representative, about the fundamental strength of the economics of renewables. Um, that's made the miracle that we see of renewables today possible. If we dialed back the clock and we talked about 1930, it would be a whole different conversation. But we have renewables are now the cheapest, um, the cheapest form of energy. However, we have a situation where government is putting the thumb on the scale. And so we're not necessarily in a free marketplace. So in New Mexico and around the country, that takes many forms that maybe need to be addressed. One is, for instance, tax subsidy. Uh, it seemed to me, and I don't have chapter and verse, but New Mexico follows in the footsteps of the federal government by giving very generous tax subsidies to the oil and gas. I guess my question is, um, what can you tell us about how we can deal with the power of the industry to kill some of our good bills?
It's tough because certainly the oil and gas industry has a lost sway in the state. I worked on it was House Bill 133 in the 2024 session. This was the Oil and Gas Reform Act that was started by the governor and the governor's executive branch agencies. They came to Representative Cristina Ortiz and myself to work on this bill. And we started working on this bill, and they had interim meetings with stakeholders and conservationists and oil and gas companies. And the oil and gas companies, their strategy is they do everything they can to water down the bill, and then they oppose it anyway. So you got to ask yourself, like, why are you making compromises with them if they're just going to oppose it? And then, we really didn't get support from the administration on that bill. We were working with agency staffers, and they said, "Oh, well, we need to change this." Well, why? Like, that's a good provision. Well, we're trying to make the bill more palatable. And sure enough, that bill, I think it got to the House floor, and then never got a hearing on the House floor. This year, I took elements of that bill and introduced 3 or 4 different oil and gas reform bills. So not a big package, but just I had one on transfer of ownership. I had another on bonding. Sort of parceling it up. And the sense is, my sense is, we get to like pass one oil and gas bill a year, and we get to pass one gun safety bill a year. So we might have 6 or 8, but for some reason we only ever get one across. And this year, the oil and gas bill we got across was the royalty rate bill. Um, and that, not a single Republican voted for that. And it's literally pitting major oil and gas companies against school kids, because that's what we do with that money is we put it towards education, and not a single Republican would vote for that. Again, because of the way bills work their way through the session, there's not the will to do a bunch of oil and gas reform at any one time. So as a result, we just sort of chip away at it.
Thank you, Representative. That's a tough one. I have a quick one just came in recently, which is about how can people participate in interim legislative hearings, and how do we find out about them?
So again, if you have a topic you want to talk about, reach out to a legislator. If you just sort of want to monitor what's going on, the legislature has a pretty good website once you learn how to navigate around it. And those agendas will be posted on the website under the committee headings. So if you go to nmlegis.gov, you can click there. I think three categories for committees: House, Senate, and interim. The interim committees are joint House and Senate committees. You can click on those committees. You can see who's on the committee, and when the agenda is ready, it'll be posted on the website. And we're also in the era of PowerPoint slides. We're getting a lot better at posting the presentations that people make, their slides, their papers, whatever it is. We post those on the website too.
Thank you. A follow-up question. So if a citizen wants to attend and make their public comment for an interim committee, are there provisions to do that? Is it only in person? Is it uniform? Or can they do it on Zoom? Those kinds of questions.
It's not uniform. Different committee chairs handle it different ways. We typically have a public comment period at the end of the committee hearing, and that's not ideal, right? So the committee hearing might last a day and a half, it might be 2.5 days. And if you save all the public comment for the last 10 minutes, first of all, you might have heard about a topic 2 days ago, and the legislators aren't thinking about it anymore. Secondly, people are tired. Third, they're packing up, they're thinking about getting on the road. And now we're doing public comment. So the public comment during the session, I think, is actually a lot more effective because you have the sponsor of the bill present the bill, and then you immediately go to public comment. And you might have 10 people make comments, you get 2 minutes each. It's just sort of more responsive that way. So there is that opportunity in the interim. It's not ideal. To be honest, it's just not as effective because of the way it's structured.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I'd like to just
Go
add
ahead,
to
Jim.
that just quickly. So 350 New Mexico obviously is very involved in the legislative process at a number of levels. One of the things we've been talking about in the last couple of weeks is that maybe we should get more involved as an organization in the interim process to better understand kind of the wordsmithing, and it's almost like you take a bill to a forge and you're a blacksmith and you beat on it on the anvil a little bit and get it in the shape you want it. So I just want to address this comment really to the audience tonight, that if that resonates with you, that you might be interested in helping us be involved in the interim process. I will send out an email, several emails over the next month, and with saying an opportunity to join us. And it's labor intensive, but it also you get to travel around the state, see our wonderful state. So there's some benefits, and I think we might be able to find some money to help people with the expense of traveling. But I just wanted to let everybody know that please step forward and help us with this project. Thank you.
Yeah, if I could chime in, I have had limited success in attending interim legislative sessions and having a conversation with a legislator or few during their breaks, during the meetings themselves. So while you may not be able to do a public comment when it's useful, you can still find a way to interact with some legislators on occasion. All right. Here's a quick one from Steffi. Are there any legislative solutions to speed permitting of renewable projects, especially if they're getting stalled at the county approval level?
Um, that's a great question. And I actually was talking about that earlier today with Senator Stefanix and Sarah Wiedmeyer, who is our staff person on the Water and Natural Resources Committee. And what I would like to have during the interim is a panel to discuss siting of production, storage, and transmission. As you may know, I had a siting bill in the last session, and to provide some state oversight of siting. This grew out of a concern of mine. I used to represent the community of Mountain Air, and there were pipelines and transmission lines that always wanted to go through the Abo Pass. Because if you look at the map, you have federal land to the south and you have federal land to the north, and you have the Abo Pass. And if you can slip your project through there, you don't have to comply with NEPA. So Mountain Air always had sort of a target on its back. I personally think there should be state oversight to protect, other resources that we feel are important. Visual impact, archaeological impact, environmental impact. The the problem is that the current permitting system is not working. It takes too long. So what sort of reform can we do where you build in protections for things we care about, but you also get it done in a timely fashion? And that's a really tough proposition. So I was at Tara Lujan's energy conference up in Espanola a couple of weeks ago. I talked to some people up there. I talked to Puck Stair, who works at MNerd, about this idea. I talked to the woman who runs RETA, the Renewable Energy Transmission Authority. There's interest in this, but figuring out how it works is challenging. So faster, more certainty, more protection. Those are sometimes competing values. I was told that Massachusetts adopted a new program to incentivize local communities, turning that around faster. And that's something we're hopefully we will look at during the interim. It's on our radar. It's not an easy issue to solve.
Just a comment on that. I'm really excited to hear you talk about your interest in this. 350 New Mexico has been very involved in the siting of the Diamond Tail solar and BESS facility. I'm not sure if that's in your district. It may be.
It is.
It is. So you have two in your district.
Mhm.
And then so we have the Rancho Viejo project. So the update is they're both still in process. The Sandoval County site at Diamond Tail is a little farther along. It's been approved by the Planning and Zoning Commission, and it was then appealed to the county commission, who approved it on a narrow vote. And in early April, there was a lawsuit filed to take it into the state district court. And I don't know, I guess, but that is certainly going to be take as long or longer than we've spent already. And so we're possibly looking at a year or 2 years before we get a decision. I haven't seen the complaint, the appeal itself, but someone else has told me they didn't think it had much strength, but it still slows things down. And the Rancho Viejo site has been through both the planning and zoning process and is waiting to go to the county commission for a second decision. So if you're a developer, time is money, and the opponents uh, understand that. That's not a new concept. So even if they're not able to stop things in the end, drawing things out for 2 or 3 years is a disincentive to this very important progress on the renewable energy front.
I'll note that as a lawyer, I've worked on land use cases in the past. I don't do that anymore just because I'm busy with other things. But, working for community groups, we blocked a gravel mine on La Bajada Mesa. We blocked a truck stop near a community. The appeal process for those land use decisions is the same as the appeal process for a big solar array. So we want to be careful that we're getting a good result. That we're not just giving developers of any project a tool to block debate and block opposition. So again, it's there are different interests involved, and balancing that in the right way is a challenge.
Agreed.
Yeah. There are a number of other comments in the chat, but I think maybe we've covered the main questions. So Jim, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Off mute. Thank you, Representative, and especially thank me and everybody else for turning out tonight. We've had a wonderful audience. It's always rewarding for us to see people who've come back to the speaker series repeatedly and encourage us to go forward. We've now been doing this for 8 years. Time goes quickly when you're having fun. So, normally we take a hiatus on the week speaker series over the summer. So it's most likely we will see you again on the fourth Monday of September. So unless someone has just had an incredible epiphany about what they want to ask.
So, Jim and Tom, thank you for inviting me. I enjoyed it. I put my contact information in the chat.
Oh,
That's not my NM Legis email address. That's the one that I read on a daily basis. So feel free to reach out if there's anything you have questions about or would like more information about.
great. So just to clarify, Representative, thank you for that. I will send up a follow-up email with the recording, the YouTube recording from this video. And I'll put a few tidbits in the text of the message. Are you okay if I include your contact info in that email to the registrants?
Sure. Yeah. If
Okay.
you post it on, well, it's already out there. Yeah. No, that's great.
Okay. Will do.
Okay.
Well, thanks everybody again, and we'll look forward to doing a better job in the legislature next year.
All right. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.